I hope everyone can hear me. I cannot see the chat feature, but I can see the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me, Q&A. And this is kind of strange, but all right. Forensic genealogy. To give an analogy of what forensic genealogy is, when you first began to work on genealogy, it was sort of like riding a tricycle. And when you grew a little bit in your skills, then you went to a bicycle with training wheels. And then after that, you took off the training wheels and you were pretty much a skilled genealogist in the analogy. Forensic genealogy are the unicycle riders of genealogy. They're the ones that have gone on to study more of the techniques and can actually do advanced genealogy. Now, just because you're a beginner does not mean that you cannot participate in forensic genealogy studies, and we'll go into that a little bit later. Oops. Okay. My background, I graduated from Boston University. It's a 15-week online course of genealogical research in 2011. And then I completed the extension course in forensic genealogy at Boston University in August of 2014. And I've compiled projects involving forensic genealogy techniques for St. Mary's Episcopal Church, the Historical Society of Harford County, and the Maryland State Firemen's Association, and also some private clients. So forensic genealogy, again, is using the advanced genealogy skills to prove or disprove an identity. It's searching for hidden individuals. Women, as we all know, they can become the most difficult to find. The insane, criminal, missing, and those that are trying to hide. It's being strong enough in your skills to prove your work and results in the court. Okay, so you have to gather enough evidence to prove your answer. It's attention to detail, strong citation of sources, and report writing skills. You need to think of it as being a private detective with strong ethics. And when I took the course for Boston University, the only way you could get certification was to become a private detective. So it didn't quite have the following as it does now. And you have to be strong on knowing your evidence classifications. So the legal definition of a forensic genealogist is applying the highest genealogical standards to research, analysis, reporting in cases with legal implication. I can't say that word. Usually involving living individuals. Okay, so certified forensic genealogists are used more in legal cases. There is a credentialing and training organization. It's the Council for the Advancement of Forensic Genealogy, and there you see their website. They do accept genealogists of all levels, and they will provide training, and they will also provide testing for your credentialing. When you do research, you you're looking to form a conclusion. You're looking to find an answer. Okay, so you gather your evidence and primary, secondary, or citations, and then you have to test the answer you've received. Okay, can you prove it? And then flip to the other side, and can you disprove it? You know, have another genealogist look at what you've come up with in order to find out if they have any questions about your research and the evidence you found. If short of proof, what you have is a theory, not an answer. So what is your reasoning behind the theory that you've come up with? And you may have to do different questions to follow another route of evidence or look for other evidence. And remember, you may not find the answer. It can be difficult. And what we call the dead end at genealogy is a complete exhaustive search. However, with all of the different things available online at libraries and different things like that, a complete exhaustive search may be impossible to come to, and you just have to try to keep looking. But more than likely, if you're hired as a professional genealogist, you're hired for a certain number of hours. And if you come to the end of the time and you haven't found anything, then that's what you put in your report. You know, we searched all of these different places and looked for these certain types of evidence. We didn't find anything within the time limit. Okay. Remember your classifications of evidence. You have a primary source. It's something like a birth record or a baptism record or different things like that. It's created by someone with firsthand knowledge of the event, and it's created around the same time as the event. So those things are also protected normally. The government records, they don't have the ability to be altered or anything. And a secondary source is everything else. When you're looking at different things like census or death records, you have to remember to look at who provided the information. Of course, with census, you can't do that. The enumerators just went after anybody who could give them information. But on the death certificate and things like that, they will have who provides the information. And you have to look at that. Was it a family member? Was it just a neighbor? Or was it just a friend? So they may or may not have the correct information. When you get into legal versus historical terminology, you are talking about different things. Beyond a reasonable doubt is evidence that you are reasonably certain of. In a historical context, beyond a reasonable doubt is not normally obtainable. Okay, there's always different information being presented in historical terms. So in a legal term, beyond a reasonable doubt is much different, and you have to have much more evidence. Clear and convincing evidence is sort of the same as above, but a standard that can be applied by a historical researcher. More than likely, that will be the highest level you can achieve as a historical or genealogical researcher. And on preponderance of the evidence, legally, it's the easiest to prove, shows more proof on one side than the other, and that is your historically beyond a reasonable doubt. When you're evaluating your evidence, there's a historical evolution of records: birth, death, marriage, land, etc. And you have to make sure that when you're gathering these records, that they're in the correct format. If someone died in the 1890s, but you have a death certificate in the format of 1920s, that may be a false record, and there are lots of them out there. You have to be skilled in handwriting, being able to disseminate one handwriting from another. Is this the same signature? Find supporting evidence. Are you finding supporting evidence in the census or land records or other things that support the information that you received from the primary evidence? And is there conflicting evidence? Is the person in two different places at one time, or have different names or different things like that? And then you have to formulate a conclusion on that evidence. Sorry about that. The standards of practice. First of all, you have to protect the privacy of everyone you're working with. Okay, wait a minute. I have a question. Okay. You cannot go around talking about your case. It's as if you're working for the court, and you cannot broadcast that or different things like that. You have to avoid conflicts of interest. If you're looking at a case that could present a problem, or with you working on the case, it could present a problem, then you have to avoid that. You cannot violate copyright laws. You cannot publish someone else's work as your own. That's one of the big ethnic rules. If you are looking at someone else's work, then you have to cite it as their work. And that goes into giving proper credit to those who provide information. And you cannot use definitely someone else's work as yours. The other thing that you cannot do is work towards a benefit towards yourself. Okay, if you're working a case where you're looking for an heir, and you happen to find this person, you cannot contact them and talk about the case, nor can you modify your work so that someone else becomes an heir in their benefit or in your own benefit. You cannot suppress evidence. If you find something that goes against your initial thought or path, you cannot suppress any evidence to support another theory. And you have to strive for the highest level of truth. Forensic genealogists have strict code of conduct, they have strict ethics, and you cannot violate any of those. There are fraudulent genealogies out there, and a lot of them are still in play. And one of them is the Horn Papers. Now, these are documents created, I'm looking at my notes here, by a gentleman. Excuse me for a second. William F. Horn. And he transcribed and edited early records written by Jacob about Western Pennsylvania, Southeastern Ohio, Western Maryland, and Northern Virginia. So a lot of these documents were around. He wrote to editors of various newspapers and convinced them to print articles based on these historical papers, which he made up. And not long after the papers began to be published, there were oppositions claiming that Horn's information was contrary when compared with other historical records. So genealogists started looking at these records. So William Horn was asked to document his findings, and so he produced more proof. The historical societies of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia started an investigation. This is how big this got. And eventually concluded in 1946 that the Horn Papers were indeed false. And they investigated certain terms like hometown, race hatred, and frontier spirit that were used in these documents that just simply didn't exist on normal documents and wouldn't have been in use in the late 18th century. But this research has been used by websites like Ancestry, Family Search, and more, and you can still find references to inaccurate genealogy. So you have to make sure that what you're looking at is indeed true records, and compare it to what has been proven to be fraudulent. Another one is Gustave Anjou. He's the most famous author of Fraudulent Genealogies, and works are still available online and other reputable libraries. And he did work in the Baltimore area for a short time. He even fabricated his own PhD. And when he was being questioned by these historians, he started writing Baltimore newspapers trying to ask for information on certain families in order to justify his research, which was proven to be false. And I'm looking at questions here. Places to publish research on genealogy, forensic methodology articles on your genealogy research case, the National Geographic Society Quarterly, the American Genealogist, the Genealogist Maryland Genealogy Society Journal. A lot of forensic genealogists do publish their findings and in cases where they can be discussed. Another mystery that you'll find in family history or in others, posers. Those are people who claim military service but never served, and or in historical contents, they were somewhere where they would be famous but really weren't, or they have famous relatives. They exaggerate honors and deeds, the battles they fought in, the ranks they obtained, and these are all in family stories or in cover-ups and other cover-ups. So we have gone through in different areas to try to find out the exact information on someone's military history, and Fold 3 or the National Archives is a really good place to do that. Now you have to remember there was a fire and it destroyed some military records, but they were relatively modern and they are being reformed in different ways, and so it's very few people that it affected, and you can easily find out about military service. I'm showing 3 questions, but I can only read 1. Okay. Now DNA, if you look up forensic genealogy right now, you'll see a lot of information about DNA and becoming a certified DNA genealogist. But in order to prove certain things about DNA ancestry, you still require the genealogical proof, the evidence. And a lot of times what you'll see are a lot of genealogists taking 2 matches on a DNA database and trying to connect to that matchup. Now, as of September 2019, federal law prohibits certain types of searches on family tree or family DNA databases. This is to stop the police from doing searches for old suspects, okay? Because part of the problem is you can match, if you take a DNA sample at a crime scene, it may match someone who is innocent. And these types of cases have come up where people who have been found in police searches of DNA databases are suddenly questioned or accused of a crime which they had nothing to do with. You remember you can have false positives up to 40%, and up to 40% of the matches can be wrong. And this isn't saying that the close DNA matches can be wrong, but their connections to the family can be wrong in the family tree that you have posted because there are mistakes in the genealogy in the tree, either yours or theirs, and that can formulate a match. Again, privacy has to be respected when you're dealing with cases of DNA, and conclusions have to be supportive not only by looking at the DNA matches, but what you have in supportive genealogical evidence. For example, I matched on my ancestry DNA a person, I had no idea who they were. They had this strange name, and I contacted them, and they tested above my first cousin that I know. And I said, I'm just curious on who you are and why we tested so close. So they contacted me, and the person was the daughter of the match. Now, this is also a cautionary tale. The person who had tested 3 years ago, okay? And only popped up in my matches within the next past 3 or 4 months. So I thought it was somebody who had tested relatively recently, but they hadn't. They tested 3 years ago, and it took that long, over 2.5 years, for them to formulate as a match. So don't think your matches are going to pop up immediately in your DNA database. It can take a while, and even if it is a close match. We went through the family tree and found out where we matched up, and we weren't first cousins, we were third cousins according to the family tree. So the DNA was delayed because all of this is done by computer, and the match was incorrect. It showed very close when it wasn't. It was third cousin, not first. And so there were some issues there. All humans have almost 99.9% of DNA in common. And what they do with your DNA when you send it into the lab is they take a massive string and look for the things that break you down to your individual hair color, eye color, body type, different things like that. There's only a small percentage of that DNA that gives us the individual characteristics. Once you go out to a full one, there's not much difference. So some companies depend on the heritage reported by participants. Okay, so if you think you're Scottish and you have that in your genealogy on certain websites, that will be what they zero in on to calculate your heritage. And if you join the DNA movement early, you'll notice that through time, your heritage has changed. So they're fine-tuning this category. And you can have the wrong information. Always approach DNA with doubt, with extreme doubt, okay? And mirror trees are something that is a tool to work with, but only with the proper genealogical evidence and techniques. A mirror tree is something that's used to find a missing common ancestor, and they can take a long time. If you're working online on a mirror tree, it should be in private mode, okay? You do not want anybody else discovering this work because it is a work in progress. It's better that you use pencil and paper, go the old-fashioned route of genealogy. You have to respect everybody's privacy, question everything, and remember to use the genealogical proof standard, not the leaf. Okay, I cannot say enough about not trusting the ancestry leaf. It can guide you into areas where you do not want to go. And you can get the wrong information in your tree and think you're matching all these wonderful people when they've made a mistake in their research and you're just duplicating their mistake. Okay, let's see if I can see the questions. I can still only see one. And I don't know why that is. Okay. Where are the William Horne papers located? That I'm not sure about. I just did a little research on his contributions to genealogy problems. Another collection that's being questioned in parts is the Draper manuscript. I do not know anything about that. Okay, and Karen Harrison says 40% of the matches being wrong should be stated as conclusions of relationships can be wrong. And I'm sorry if I did not make that perfectly clear. DNA, it can show you a relationship, but the conclusion of the relationships are wrong because they use the information that is provided by the users. Okay, so you can't always trust the trees. And I hope that answered those questions. Okay. Practical applications of forensic genealogy. Finding lost heirs, returning property, returning remains, proving identity of someone that was in your family or in someone else's family, verifying a story, identifying people in photos, finding living relatives, and looking for unidentified persons. Okay, and I've used it in finding heirs, for returning property, and proving identity, and finding living relatives. My work with Maryland State Firemen's Association, we've had people who were killed in the line of duty long before acknowledgments were made in this type of death. So we look for living relatives to attend the memorial services honoring those heroes which died in the line of duty many years ago. And so, and that has proved tricky at times. We had one case where a fire chief died in a vehicle rollover, and he was listed in his obituary as single. And I'm going to give kudos out here to Chris Smithson. He assisted in this project. He found out that there was a marriage certificate, that the chief was indeed married and had children. So using that information, I went through and looked for the children, and we eventually found grandchildren, but at that time they were not interested in attending. We had another firefighter who was involved in the plane crash up in Cecil County. He had a heart attack and passed away on the scene while they were working this plane crash. And he and his wife had no children. His sister had children, and we eventually found his niece, who attended the memorial service. It's tricky, and it gets trickier because there are a lot of privacy applications now in use on the internet. And so when you start working backwards to try to find living people, what you're going to find is the privacy is more stricter, and you can have more problems finding people today than you can in 1920. Returning property, we get family Bibles a lot at different things, at yard sales, at rummage sales, and different things like that. And if there's family information in them, we know that the genealogist of the family would be extremely interested in receiving these back. So we try to backtrack and find someone in the family to return this property to. We have also, I've also worked on a case where a painting was found. The family had moved back to Canada, and we were looking for children, great-grandchildren of this painter to return the painting to. And we found them in Canada, but then they wanted us to find somebody in the United States so they didn't have to mess with customs. And we finally found someone, a great-grandson who was teaching at the University of Arizona. So, and he got the painting back and he was very happy. Returning remains, a lot of people, more than you would imagine, do not have their remains claimed by family members, and basically they become ward of the state. And in one state, Oregon, there was a project where the information on the person's name was provided, and genealogists work on finding family members to see if they were interested in claiming the remains, and if not, they were interred in one common grave. They were cremates, okay? And that project I assisted on too. Proving identity, you may have relatives who come up as you're not quite sure who they were, so you can work on that. And verifying a story, identifying people in photographs, that works best if you have a collection of family photographs and you can go back and sort of classify people in different areas and look for them in other photographs. And finding, we already discussed finding living relatives. If you die without a will, it's called intestate. Okay, laws vary by state, and I know I'm going to say this wrong, but in Maryland it's per stripies, meaning each branch is to receive an equal share of the estate. So in a lost heir search, you're going back to find if there are any heirs existing in this estate. And it can get quite complicated. But again, you're working back and over and not necessarily along a smooth branch style tree. You're going in different directions. Lawyers will often hire genealogists to research a family tree for this, but you have to be very careful. Often you will not know what the heirs are going to inherit. That's to protect you from any legal problems. And you have to provide a report, and you may be called in to testify. Another area that forensic genealogists are finding a path to work is identifying unknown persons or missing persons. There is a website out there called the Doe Network, and it is a classification of missing persons known basically around the world. They have different countries, they have different states, and you can go through and see information on missing persons and unidentified bodies that have been found. Okay, some are in skeletal form, some are not in skeletal form, and they have information on these people And some forensic genealogists have gone through and actually connected missing persons to unidentified bodies that were found or solved unidentified cases. And we'll go through that in 1 minute. Again, family Bibles, you find them everywhere, yard sales, antique shops, different things like that. And if you can get one and see if you can trace a current family member to get the Bible back, that's great. The genealogical information in a lot of those are extremely important. If not, then provide the Historical Society with the genealogical information, and that way it can be researched. Okay, investigating a family story. Every family has a mystery, okay? This is a picture, I'm the baby, and is my Aunt May on the left and my Aunt Florence holding me. This has always been a family mystery because we never knew how they were related, okay? And also, they were always very high society. They went to operas, they went on cruises, and I used to spend a lot of time with them in their house in Philadelphia. They eventually moved to Stone Harbor, New Jersey, and I spent a lot of time, summers there. And a question came up probably at the start of the pandemic on how Aunt May and Aunt Florence were related to us. So I have been working on this mirror tree and tracing back their heritage to find out where it connects in the known family tree. It is a very long process, and to get the areas of proof where you know their family history is correct, and finding out exactly where they fit in to our family tree. So it's working backwards. We did find out where the money came from. They were related to the Hines family. Okay, taking on a local mystery. This is an amateur genealogist, Rita Hood, okay, who was, I guess, bored at work one day and decided that she would look up some cases, and she found a picture of an unknown body that was found in Griffith Park, Los Angeles, in June of 1968. It was the same day that Martin Luther King was shot. So a lot of the news on this discovery was kind of result in the second page of the newspaper. So nobody paid much attention to it. And she remained unidentified for 48 years. Rita looked through the inscription and found that she was wearing a wedding ring. And the wedding ring had initials on it and a wedding date. So the initials were CB to EJ 9/4/1920. She used her genealogical skills to identify the most common C name in the late 1919s, 1920s, the most common C name and the most for males, and the most common E name for females. And I think that's right. Yes, the common E name for females, I'm sorry, and the common C name for males. I had that backwards. So she found a variety of names, and she went on to search wedding or marriage information for September 4th, 1920. So she finally found a marriage in Detroit, Michigan, where Edna Lydia J. married Charles J. Bush. So she went back to find living relatives. She did her search and working the family tree backwards, and she discovered that Edna had 2 daughters, and she died at the age of 30. So the daughters were Geraldine and Geraldine was married 3 times, the last time to a man named Paul Manzo of Florida in 1960. And she found a John Manzo living in California, who was their son. And she sent him a text. She found him on Facebook. She sent him a text. And she asked him if he was a relative of Edna Bush. And so for a long time, she waited for an answer. And on September 11th, John Manzo Jr. in Fresno County replied that Edna Bush was indeed his grandmother, and Geraldine, who died in 2014, was his mother. So she had confirmation that she was going the wrong way. The right way. Hood then asked if he knew who would receive Edna's wedding ring, because it appeared there was a Jane Doe found in California who had possession of that ring. And he came back with "call me." He was so nervous that he sent her the wrong phone number, and so she asked him to call her instead. And when they spoke a moment later, he goes, "My sister's been missing since 1968. So an amateur, very basic genealogist took all the information, did her investigation all the way to Detroit, and traced it back and found a family member who could identify this missing person, and based on a wedding ring with an inscription. So you do not have to be a advanced certified genealogist to work on these skills. Now, the Doe Network does have a panel who you submit your findings through, and they are advanced genealogists. They will investigate your findings, and they will make a clarification on whether or not it's a true identity or not. But if you go to the Doe Network and look at their solved cases, you will see a lot of cases that have been solved based on work by their volunteers who are genealogists just like you. Okay, I'm looking at questions. Don't see any new. Okay, in some states and cities, they have taken on volunteers to locate family members of unclaimed bodies. And again, when you're working on this type of thing, you do your own research, write a report of your conclusion, and submit it to a committee or an overseeing party, and they will make contact with the family members. It's not a good idea for the genealogist to always make contact with family members of unclaimed bodies. When we worked on the project in Oregon, it was you do your own research and submit to like a committee chairman, and they went on to review your work and then to submit it. And then the state contacted the family members. if you want to experiment with this type of work, try to work with an established group of volunteers. And if you're not working with an established group, try to contact another person who's into genealogy and has a good knowledge of the type of information that you need to double check your work. And you need to follow the guidelines to avoid unnecessary emotions with the family members. You do not want to try to contact a family member outright, because if you're wrong, it could cause problems. Remember the ethics and standards. And if you're not sure, don't report it. If you've come up with a theory that you can't prove, in certain cases, that may be one thing to state, okay? We looked at this theory, but we could not prove it, and we could not find any other evidence away from this theory. So, okay, stop share. Are there any questions? I'm bringing up my questions now. I know I talked fast and I covered things that may seem advanced to some of you, especially the proof of evidence and everything. There are books out there, such as this, Evidence Explained. This is the second edition. I know they're on numerous other editions after this, but this goes through and talks about different types of evidence and how to classify it, and also how to cite it. There are different citation categories, from everything for microfiche to family Bibles to finding it at the Historical Society. And you have to make sure that you're citing it correctly in order to be taken seriously. And so this book has the information on that. Going into DNA, one of the best books I found is Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy. This is put out by the Family Tree. And also Genetic Genealogy in Practice. This is an excellent book on how to classify those types of discoveries. And for those who are not skilled in handwriting, reading early American handwriting, a lot of times what a genetic genealogist has to look at are the signatures and handwriting on different things. Also, we practiced in class on documents that have come from a legal source that have information redacted or covered up or sanitized, so that you cannot see the information, and learning how to compare signatures when they're covered up, because a lot of people embellish loops and different things like that, the way they dot their I's, the way they do their L's, and you can a lot of times see that through the covered portion. And we actually went through and matched those. Another way of finding missing people, or people who went in different directions, was through the census. And you may not find them in your area or in your family group, but they can be found. We had to, in one of the class cases, we had to look for 2 Russian orphans who were living with their aunt, and we had the aunt's last name in Brooklyn. And we were able to find them. You have to know your source and how you need to search that source. Okay, so practice. The only way you're ever going to get on to writing the unicycle is to practice, practice, practice. And that's the same way with forensic genealogy. You have to get comfortable with your research methods and knowing which evidence to look for and which evidence to avoid. You have to be comfortable with your research methods and get feedback, talk to other genealogists, compare work and different things like that. So I got 6 questions now. Okay. Yeah, they are now on the 3rd edition of Genealogy Evidence Explained. I'm not quite sure what may have changed on the 2nd or the 3rd. And there's an advanced genetic genealogy techniques and case studies by Debbie Parker Wayne. Thank you, Chris. There is a book available on forensic genealogy, but it is out of print. And if you go on Amazon, they're charging astronomical prices for it. It's like $800 for a copy. And Chris, I need to know if Owen is ready. Can you unmute? Okay. Are there any other more questions? No. Okay, he is not ready yet. Any other questions? Oops. No? Okay, I'm done early. We're running a little bit ahead of time here. And I've covered just about all the cases that I am aware of. Chris, do you want to cover any of those that you worked on? You can unmute. I guess not. Okay, so we'll take a break while we try to get Owen on, and then we'll continue. Thank you.